everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Watcast. We're really excited to be back in here with you guys today, and we're super excited for what we have going on this time. It's going to be a really good one. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, for sure. This week we're going to be answering the question of who am I with our special guest, Emily Hitchcock. She's a wonderful friend of the show, and just cannot wait to see what we're going to get into. So, without further ado, join me in welcoming Emily Hitchcock.
Emily, welcome to the Watcast. We're super excited to have you with us today to talk with us about this really hard, confusing, frustrating question at times of who am I? Who are we? What is it that is our identity? What do we call ourselves? All these things that go into this question. Super excited to have you with us today to talk about these things. I think it'll be really fun. But before we get going, there's one more person I want to bring on with us today because there's something that she is deeply passionate about that I think is going to be a really helpful tool as we engage in this discussion and seek to answer this question of who am I? Not that I think we'll find an answer, but that's not exactly the goal. The goal is to continue the conversation in a way that helps us continue to unpack ourselves and understand ourselves a little bit better. So without further ado, please welcome with me to the Watcast, the Leah Woods. Welcome to the Watcast, Leah. Super excited to have you with us today. Super fun to have all three of us here. I think it was really fun to get to do this with Q and Caleb last semester, and so getting to do it again once this semester is really exciting for me. And I just think it's such a wonderful, wonderful question that we're going to be exploring together. So thank you guys for being here. Welcome, and really excited to chat.
Excited to be on.
Big facts. All right.
Big facts.
So the first sort of big abstract question, to sort of set the stage for us that I have, is simply that question, who am I? And how does one go about thinking about that question? I'm hesitant to say answering that question because I don't know if we ever really truly will know what that is, who we are. As individuals, I think it's easy for us to recognize that we as believers especially have this narrative identity as those created in the image of God, right? Who have fallen short because of sin, but then in Christ that image is being restored, and that's sort of our narrative identity as believers. But also we have our own stories and our own identities, and so how does one go about maybe asking a question like, who am I?
Yeah. I think so. When I think about identity, I think of moving parts, and I think of parts that are standing still. And so I think when we think about our identity, like that piece you talked about, like the part of my identity that comes from Christ, the more of the whose am I, then who am I, that's never going to change, right? So my identity in Christ is never going to change, and that's the part that I need to understand first and understand the most. But I also think there are so many pieces that change, and they change all the time. For me, I went from college student to wife to teacher to mother, all in the span of like a year and a half, right? So things can change quickly. But last semester, Caleb and I and a couple other people, we did a book study on After Whiteness by Jennings. And one of the ideas that he talks about in his book is he talks about fragments and how we're all made up of fragments, and we all are fragments. And we really took that idea and kind of pulled it apart, and it was something that I had never really thought about. And when he talks about fragments, part of what he's talking about is just all of the things that have kind of brought you to where you are. So the town you grew up in, the way your parents treat each other, the way they treat you, if you have siblings, all of those things. And so I think when you hear that like big question of who am I I think that's the first thing I think of is we have these moving parts and then we have these solid parts. And so if we can find the solid parts first, those can hold us as the other parts move. And I think if you do it in reverse order, that's when you kind of start to fall apart. And when that question becomes not a fun question, but a really overwhelming and sometimes even defeating, I think. So that's kind of how I've wrapped my mind around that recently, especially after reading that book, which was really helpful, thinking about it kind of through that lens.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's really helpful in something, even if that's something that conceptually like feels obvious sometimes. I think it's good to remember that I have this image comes to mind of like a solid rock that is sitting slightly above the water of like a flowing river.
Yeah.
Right. And that rock is solid. It's there. It's firm. It's not moving no matter how hard this water's rushing, no matter everything else that's going on in our lives. This is what's firm. This is what's true about who we are always, no matter what is going on. But the reality is that there is other things going on as well that influence maybe the way that we start to think about that one stern thing, the thing that is firm, this thing that is grounded about who we are in Christ. I think even as we know and understand that part of our identity better, we begin to see those other things in our lives in a different way that I actually think then further enriches our understanding of what is firm in our identity. And so another question that I have is directed towards you, Leah, because I know you're just excited about it. And so I'd love to chat with you about this. Tools that exist out there in helping people understand who they are, understand why they react to things a certain way, why they experience certain things a certain way. And so this tool that I know you're excited to talk about is the Enneagram. So how does a tool, my first question for you is, how does a tool like the Enneagram help us in further understanding that firm identity of who we are in Christ, as well as understand how we experience and interact with all those other things about who we are that may be more dynamic?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? The reason I love the Enneagram is because it's been so much of an outlet for me to really dig deeper and almost get an anchor of, okay, this is why I do what I do. So basically the Enneagram is a 9 personality test that is so key in figuring out motives and reasons behind what you do. And the reason that I love it is because, first off, I think in order to function well in society, you have to understand yourself. And I think that so many people go out into the day-to-day and they don't understand why things affect them the way that they do, and they don't know how to react from that. And so I think that the Enneagram is so beautifully figured out is because most people, I've never actually met somebody that doesn't fit into the Enneagram, are going to have a number. And my number is a 3-wing 2, which is an achiever, and then the 2 is a helper. And so beneath those numbers is so much research and science and studies and things like that show how, compared to your number, you might react to a situation, or your brain works, or things like that. And so I think that it's so important to know yourself, because it's how you function. It's who you interact with. It's also going to be big on your faith, because if you are somebody that realizes, okay, I'm not an organized person, you might need to have a little bit more creativity in your faith. Where an Enneagram 1 loves routine, loves schedules, and they love that routine of reading their Bible every single day at 8 a.m. Where an Enneagram 7 is going to want to experience God in nature, or things like that, where it's not a one system, or it's not a one avenue to how to live life. And so that's why I love it, because it's so different for everybody, but I think it's just so important to realize that things affect you so much differently than they affect other people, and it's key to understanding yourself before you even attempt to understand anybody else. So,
yeah, that's good. I think one of the, I don't know a whole lot about the Enneagram, but one of the things that I have found that I do think is very helpful about it is this idea that it not only like ones who love routine, it's not only going to explain to them that they love routine, right? Sometimes that's easy for us to know about ourselves. It's like, okay, I may know if I was a one that I like routine. But it goes further than that, is what I really like about the Enneagram, is that it goes and tells you like what sorts of fears you have a tendency toward that might make you that might make routine appealing to you. And so that I've found really, really helpful, is that it doesn't stop at, okay, this is what you do. It really moves you towards the why might you be doing those things. Either of you, talk to me a little bit about the whole stress and growth dynamic of Enneagram. That's something that I've never fully understood about the Enneagram, but I actually think that it has my own misunderstanding of what those things mean, I think, have led me to mistype myself at a certain point in my life. I go back and forth sometimes between wondering if I'm an 8 or if I'm a 5, a 5 in growth, which has 8 tendencies, as I've learned recently. And so I go back and forth, and I think part of why I go back and forth is because I don't understand it completely. And so talk to me a little bit about that dynamic of the stress and growth.
Yeah. Well, so from what I've learned a little bit more about the Enneagram in the last year or so. And so I think that there's a temptation to like, I have these 9 numbers. I need to find my number. And then I'm going to have all of the answers to how I need to do my motion and when I need to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that there's help in that, but I think there's freedom to kind of like, there's a fluidity, right? Like we all have pieces of all of these numbers, and then you have one that kind of matches you the most. And Leah, jump in here. I'm also 3-wing too, which is funny. We've never talked about that.
I thought you were 2 for some reason.
So I've learned that in health, you're going to go one direction, and in fear or in unhealth, you're going to go in another direction. And I experienced this, like very dramatically, this past summer, 2 summers ago now, I guess. So what I've learned about myself, and it's interesting thinking about who I am, right? I'm definitely like part of my parents, like good or bad, all of those things together. And so I've watched like my parents in stressful situations, and I've seen like what they go to, and I've adopted some of those things on my own. But I'm naturally an achiever. And I want to do well, and when I'm in a healthy environment, I can handle that. When I'm like feeling super safe, I want to help everybody. When I'm like stressed or in an unhealthy situation, everything has to be perfect, and I go to like the worst extreme of a 1, where it has to be perfect, and I have to be the one who accomplishes every single task. So this is super relatable for all of the college students out there. But I had just had my 2nd child, and the kitchen sink was full of dishes, and I was done. I was spent. I had parented 2 children all day, and I was tired. And I looked and I saw this big mess, and I said, I have to clean all of it right now. And I ended up in the corner of the kitchen sobbing, because I was washing these dishes, and I saw this moment of like, I knew that this didn't need to get done right now, but I felt this extreme pressure that I had to be the one to fix it. Wow. And so when I kind of like was able to see that happening, I was able to kind of like ask some of those questions of like, whoa, like why am I doing this? And learning about the Enneagram and learning that when I'm in stress, I take on this like responsibility to like fix and like accomplish that, knowing that I can kind of catch myself doing that, and I can, not always successfully, but a lot of times I can pull myself out of some of that unhealth in those like low moments. I think maybe something that would be helpful that you probably know more about than I do is kind of how numbers connect to each other.
Yeah. I want to touch on what you just said too, is I think that ultimately it might be my favorite part of the Enneagram is what you just said, is not knowing that I'm an achiever and that I love to do things, but I think the Enneagram is so much more of a key of pointing out the unhealthy parts of you. And I mean, anybody that's really into the Enneagram, I think if you read about your number, you're just ashamed. Because so much of it, obviously there's greatness in all of our personalities, but there's some really bad parts of all of our personalities. And I think that is honestly like my favorite part of the Enneagram, is because you're an achiever, but what are you going to do to achieve? Are you going to, and it goes through tendencies that are unhealthy of ours that we all have. And for the 5, it's going to look different. For the 8, it's going to look different. And that's why I love the Enneagram probably the most, is just to show, okay, and it's easier too once you understand yourself to catch it, just like you said, like, okay, that is not how I should be acting, and I know that, and you can catch it just so much faster. But I don't know a lot about how they connect, like the theories behind them, but I do know that in a 3 in health is going to go to a 6. So it's all like a triangle. That there's a triads. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the word. Yep. And so I know what my number goes to in health and in unhealth, and I think that it's super important to know personally what your number is. So in health, we go to 6, and so that's going to be more of a safe. We can love other people better. In unhealth, we go to 9s, which can be very complacent and almost in a way just push everything off. And it also, as Emily was saying, like she goes to more of a get everything done, and it's so weird how knowing your number it figures out that getting everything done and also doing nothing at all are both very unhealthy habits. And it's good to know what your tendencies are, and mine might be to lay on my couch and read a book and ignore everything, but it more tends to more be get everything on my to-do list done and make everyone else do it with me right now. And if everyone doesn't do it with me right now, then I will not be happy, And so things like that, where I don't know all the ins and outs of all the triads, but I do know it's really important to know which numbers which numbers yours goes to in health and unhealth. So
I think just kind of going off of that, I think that's such a good point. And I think a lot of people, so most of these personality tests that you do, they're just going to tell you your areas of strength, right? So like the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, they're all going to tell you the things you're good at. You probably know most of those things. People are going to point those out in you because that's much more comfortable to say like, hey, you're really good at this. And like, hey, I noticed you have this like really big character flaw, right? Like that's uncomfortable. People most likely aren't going to do that. And we're naturally like, we're not going to look, no, that's not fun. Nobody, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend the time doing that. So there's a book, his name is something Rohr, maybe Richard, I'm not sure. Yeah. Richard Rohr. So The Road Back to You, which I listened to part of it and then eventually didn't listen to the whole thing. But when he talks about that, like he says something similar to that. Like the one that like makes you the most offended when you listen to him describe it is probably yours. Probably yours. But I think so like you said, like you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm just the worst person ever. But I think kind of like back to that like rock, like if I know at the end of the day that the creator of the universe created me, my flaws are fine.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. Because they didn't come from me. I'm sure I exacerbate them, but like I am perfectly unique with my good and with my bad. Yeah. And I'm my like the Lord has done something very cool just in like my time as a believer as I kind of go through these seasons of themes and just what the Lord is teaching me. So it'll be like 2 or 3 years of just kind of like the same lesson everywhere I look. And for the last, actually since my senior year of college here at PBA, which was longer ago, every year it seems. But the Lord doesn't waste. That has been the theme for me, that the Lord doesn't waste. So when I find these pieces, like, right, even this, so like, to be perfectly honest, like that 2 years ago in my kitchen, that was my lowest moment. Like, it was beyond tears in the corner. And there was so much shame in that, right? But now here I am talking about it on a podcast, and I don't for a second doubt that there's somebody who's like I had a moment in the corner of the kitchen. And so I think that like, there's so much goodness in finding the parts that are messy. And I think like the parts that are messy are the parts that cause us to like have conflict and that make life messy. And so if we can find those and like start working on them and start cleaning them up, like it's just, it's like one more tool in relationship, which at the end of the day, like that's the ultimate goal, is a relationship that we have with people. And so I think like that like stuck out so much too, because I really do think that's such a valuable, truly like valuable piece of the Enneagram. Love that.
For sure.
Wow, there's so much good there. So good. But with that good, I imagine there are some things that can be dangerous as well. So in your experience in diving into the Enneagram, Leah, or even just understanding your own identity and some of those other tools out there that exist, what are some of the dangers that can come from putting too much dependence on a tool like the Enneagram when trying to ask this question of who am I?
I can go for that for a little bit. I think with almost any personality thing, with any religion, with almost anything, you can become too reliant on something. And so much so that instead of it helping you figure out your identity, it becomes your identity. And I think that is something that I've struggled with the Enneagram, is because I don't want to just be that Enneagram person that is obsessed with the Enneagram. I want to be that person that uses it fully as a tool to help me become better. And so the fear and the danger of the Enneagram obviously is using it too much and having that be a crutch instead of something to help you fly. And so with the Enneagram, there's a lot of things, and as I mentioned before, it points out a lot of flaws. And I think that one thing that I've been able to see some people do is say, oh yeah, that's just because of my personality. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves about it, is because what I love to do is I like to see, oh yeah, that's a flaw and that's a tendency of mine, so I'm going to fight that. Where I've had friends where they like, oh no, I just need my alone time, and that's in my Enneagram. And yeah, alone time is great, but sometimes you need to not go to those tendencies. And I've heard some people go, oh, I'm just a really harsh person. That's my personality. And things like that, or, oh, I just never speak up. That's my personality. And I think that obviously with anything, that is going to be your tendency. But I love when you can fight that tendency and say, okay, yes, that's what I'll fall to when I'm weak, but I can fight that. And if you understand where you're going to be weak, that's when you can fight it better. So the Enneagram is perfect for people being too dependent on it. It's a crutch that people love to be understood, and so when you feel understood, you want to stay there. And so if you feel understood in something, that's when it's you have to just be careful. Instead of using it to help you, you just use it as an excuse. So
same kind of thought. I think there's a Trey Kennedy or like Jake Triplett do like a spoof on this where it's like somebody asking you like to do some type of like service in church, and you're like, I'm so sorry, like I'm an Enneagram 4, like I just can't do that. So I think exactly that. And also like that idea of like I'm an 8, I'm harsh, like it just is what it is. Like when you think about like you're connected to these other numbers in your own personality, but you're also connected to other people. So you have like recognize like, oh, I'm more meek, I need to speak up, or I'm more harsh, I need to tone it down, within our community. But on that same note of that, like there's this danger, right, of like the Enneagram is going to tell me who I am. The Enneagram did not create you. And so when you're looking at like art or music or a book, you learn more about the creation by learning more about the creator, right?
Yeah.
So like I can spend forever in the Enneagram and I can learn all of these things, but there are things that I'm going to miss and that I'm not going to learn if I'm not also in scripture. And so I think like same like with Myers-Briggs or any of these. And I think that's the tendency. I think there's this like desire, which I'm sure is not like new to any generation, of like, who are we? And like, who am I? And we so often are looking in. And I think there's like such a danger in that. And it goes back to that like big rock and the little ones, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to know who created us, and we have to know that the Enneagram was not that. And so I think recognizing that, and then exactly like Leah said, just not, you can't hide behind it or under it.
Yeah.
You know, you have to let it do the work.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of tap into that a little bit more too is like, there's also flaws in the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And you're
good.
also not going to fit 100% into a number.
Yes.
And so I love, there's parts of a 3 that I am not. There's like, there's definitely some parts that I mean, most of it I very much so am. but there's some parts, like I love following Enneagram accounts on Instagram. That's a fatal flaw of mine. and sometimes it straight up just does not apply to me. And so I think that's also something to understand too, is like, just because you're an Enneagram 3 wing 2 doesn't mean everything that they say about the 3 is going to apply to you. And that's obvious, but a lot of it is stereotyping other people.
Yeah.
So Josh, you might be a 5. I think you are a 5. There's so many parts of the 5s that might not apply to you. And even though that might be probably what you resonate with the most, understanding too that people are not their numbers. And I think that is, for me, that's probably where my biggest issue is I love understanding people and I love trying to figure them out. And so I think it can be dangerous too, putting a number on somebody. Like I almost struggle to go through a conversation without being like, I wonder if they're a 2, or, you know, like it's bad. It can be bad to really stereotype people and understand that there's so much more to them than just their personality type, and that they're not going to resonate with everything that their number is. So.
This is so good. There's so much good there. And I really loved the first thing you said, Leah, about how with anything there's a danger in putting too much dependence, to relying on something too much, to the point that becomes our identity.
Yeah.
And I think the beautiful thing about that danger is that in Christ, that's where we flourish.
Yeah.
That's not the danger. That's what we're moving towards. And so we have a tendency to put too much dependence on something.
Yeah.
If we can learn to utilize that tendency for dependence and shift it towards Christ, man,
so
how massive is that rock gonna be,
Yeah.
right? I think that's so good, especially because as we've talked about a little bit, is that we so often experience these things in life that go by, or that happen, this water that's rushing around, that feels identity altering, if not is in some ways, changes at least some aspect of who we are in that time. I know for me, one way that I'm experiencing this now in a slightly comical way, but slightly like it's actually real and scary, and I hate everything about it, is I have an appointment next Wednesday to cut all of my hair off.
Oh my gosh.
And am very sad even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And one thing that has come up in conversation is like people asking me like, well, why are you so attached to your hair? Part of it is it's quite literally been attached to me for the last 7 years of my life. I was talking to somebody and realizing that with the exception of like 6 months, my hair really hasn't been like above my chin since I was probably 10 years old.
Yeah.
And so like it feels like it really shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it
is.
it's so hard to let go of because I love my hair. It's, it's so fun. It feels like it has become me. It's so me, right?
Yeah.
You also have gray hair, so it's a plus.
Thank
Gray
you.
hair.
But I'm in the process of applying and interviewing for jobs in Japan, and this organization that I happen to have a third interview for, which is exciting.
Got it.
Has asked me to have my hair cut before the third interview.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's something that I want to do. It's Japan's a place that I want to be, and so recognizing that I need to make this change, and recognizing that it feels like it is a part of who I am, part of my identity, and in some ways, like, sure, it has become that, but it's not essential to who. It's not essential to really who I am.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you guys. You, as you mentioned, went through many like identity altering transitions in your life in a very short amount of time. Sort of your experience in that space with wrestling with really who you are as your identity as student to working adult to wife to mom, all these changes, how those identities have changed, and yet you can still be rooted in that rock.
Yeah, I think kind of actually even like bringing the Enneagram back into this, so like knowing that the core of who I am desires to achieve. So in whatever thing is like most like on me as my identity, whatever role I'm most invested in, I feel a deep desire and then sometimes an unhealthy like expectation to achieve. So as a student, that was like I had to get good grades. I had to be the best, the top of the class. And then as a wife, I wanted to be the best wife that I could be. So putting pressure on myself that I don't need to, and then the same thing with a mother. But what I've noticed, and I noticed this is the most when I became a mom, is that that's not true. I noticed it right when Caleb and I got married, and I'll go into that story just a tiny bit. But I think the biggest place that you invest your identity and that you attach to becomes the easiest opportunity for the enemy to get at you.
Wow.
And so for me, like my mind is a battlefield all the time. For everybody it's different, but for me, it's just all right in here. And that came in one particular form consistently through college. Caleb and I were we were driving away from our wedding reception, and it changed. And I noticed that like these like arrowy, fiery, like dart thoughts changed. And I said something. I remember like being in the truck on I-95, saying something to Caleb and praying in the car in that moment. And it was kind of like a big wake up of like right now, like July 25th, 2015, wife is the newest, largest piece of my identity. And so that is my biggest threat to the enemy, because that is my biggest sphere of influence. And then so for the year, 2 years, first 2 years Caleb and I were married, I was like really hyper focused on that part of my identity, but also hyper focused on protecting who is speaking into that part of my identity, right? And then it shifted after I had Owen and Liam. And I didn't even pay attention to it shifting. And I remember a moment of kind of like in that same summer, crying on the kitchen floor. It's a really pivotal time for me. But I remember realizing like I didn't pay attention. My second biggest fear now is my motherhood. The way that I invest in my boys is a threat to the enemy. So he's going to attack it. And so I think when that is my only identity and I'm in charge of the achievement of my motherhood, or I'm in charge of my achievement as an educator or as a wife, it's way too vulnerable. And if that's the only thing that is like wrapped around me, I don't stand a chance. And so it was so cool though, because once I realized that, I took so much power back. And I was able to take that motherhood like badge that had been the only thing I'd been focusing on, and recognize that I needed to move it because it wasn't a shield, right? It wasn't enough. I don't remember your original question.
That's great.
I'm like
It's
going
wonderful.
on a tangent, but I'm so passionate about this because it's been so important in my own life. Recognizing how the enemy is trying to get at you. And I think the other thing that's really important is he's not going to stop trying, right? It doesn't matter if I recognize it or not. But somebody once, I remember talking with a friend of mine when we lived in Texas, and I was talking to her about like specific ways I was being attacked. And she said, if you can take an area of attack and you can turn it into communication with the Lord, the enemy is going to stop using that, because
Wow.
it's going to achieve the opposite goal. And
That's
she said,
really good.
you got to be aware, because he's going to try to find something else. So it doesn't mean that you've won and that the attacks are over. But that's been a really, really helpful tool for me, is to know, kind of in that same vein of like the Enneagram, of like, know where my weaknesses are, so that I know how to protect them. But I think when we move life stages or phases, or when I go from senior year to my new job, those are really big life moments. And so like that becomes a huge brand new piece of who you are, but it's a piece you don't fully understand yet. And so it's a piece that you haven't like girded up against. So like I'm still a relatively new mom, but I'm 4 years in. And so I have a little bit under my belt where I know where my strengths are as a mom, and I know where my weaknesses are. So I know where I need extra prayer. I know where I need extra community. And so I think that's a big part of transitioning into new steps. And if we just look at the shiny pieces of it, and we don't look at the weaknesses and the soft spots, I think that's the danger in kind of shifting from one big transition to another. And then also there's a piece of you when you take on a new identity, you hear this term a lot. Sorry, motherhood is like my main point of reference.
I love it.
But
I love it.
so the
good.
thing is that you hear this phrase a lot, that like when you become a mother, like you lose part of who you are. And I think that's dramatic and a little bit annoying, but I think that it's just a misnomer, because I think there's only so much room like in my capacity to have pieces of identity. And so I don't think that any of them ever go away, but I think right now in my life, motherhood is more of my identity. Because it takes up more of my time and my energy and my prayers. That's more of what my responsibility is to focus on right now. And so I don't think I've lost anything, but I think that the priorities and the time that I have looks different right now. So I think that when we shift from one thing to the next thing in life stages and in things that bring us identity, that there's kind of like a mourning period when you can't see it. Like I don't see as much of single college Emily these days, right? Like I still have the same passions that I had then. I still have the same interests, but I don't have the same amount of time to focus on them. So I didn't lose that. It's not that I'm not that anymore, but there's only so much space and so much room. And so I think that that's part of that shifting process and of moving through those. And that's when it can be hard, right? When you go through like a bunch of life transitions at once, like that's overwhelming and that can wear you down. Yeah. But again, like when you go back to the big rock, like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much of Emily I can see, because Emily is not where I need to be looking. And so if that's all I'm ever looking at, I'm constantly going to be overwhelmed and unsure and scared. But I think going back to that, like always going back to the rock, right? I think that's the one thing that will carry you through each of those transitions when you get new pieces of identity and new fragments added in.
It's so good. There's something so sweet in there that I want to pull out, and I wasn't expecting it at all. This you said the word responsibility, and how your identity in some way was linked to where most of your responsibility lies at that point in time, right? And I think that is so interesting. I was in a class today. When we were talking, and man, this is so good, so fitting. We were talking about aspects of what it means to be created in the image of God, right? And one thing that came up in that conversation is this idea of stewardship. One of stewarding that image well and being as much as we know to be right imagers of God, but also in that God himself, who created the world, right, created all that there is, sustains and maintains that creation. He stewards that creation, and as image bearers, we're called to some sort of stewardship. And so even like a part of that rock is this idea of stewardship. And so I think that picture of response, like what must I steward well right now? What is in front of me?
Yeah.
And that being much of what you identify yourself with in that time, I think is really, really cool, because it even goes back to that identity of steward in light of the image of Christ that I bear.
Yeah,
and so I think that's really, really cool. And Leah, I know you as well, not too long ago made a decision that was a pretty massive decision. I know similarly I made a similar decision in my life that was felt absurd at the time, right? But I'll ask just you about that experience and what that was.
Yeah. So volleyball is the big decision. And I think it ties in so well to this conversation because, I mean, how many people do you know that are in college athletics that don't very heavily rely on that as their identity?
Yeah.
And college athletics is it's the perfect grooming spot for that. And that is something that, because of an injury and a lot of prayer, I had to stop and I had to step back from. And I think there's a lot to it, but also for me, there's not as much as there should be, because it's funny because I started volleyball super late. I started as a junior in high school, and I'm 6'2", so yeah, obviously I'm gonna be not the worst person on the court. I kind of was my first year, but it's funny because I started so late, so the Lord was always so prevalent in my volleyball, and so that's one reason why volleyball was never truly my identity, was because from the very beginning, and I'm blessed to have been able to see it this way, I knew that it was the Lord working through me. And what my favorite quote is, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And so the Lord speaks to me, I think, as he speaks to most people, through passions and through peace. And so
say that one more time for all the people that just pause their computer screens.
Yeah, no, he speaks to me through passion, what he gives me, and the peace that he gives me. And so for the longest time...
Wow. Sorry, we can end right here. You're done.
That's really good.
That's so good. Keep going.
you.
Sorry, I've interrupted you 3 times.
No, I love it. And so for the longest time, the Lord brought me passion in volleyball. And I knew so fully that it was not my own doing, because as any sport, it takes so long to get good at. And I had always just scraped by. Like, my first year as a junior, I scraped by making varsity team, which was just because I was 6'2". And then I had that. As a senior, I was like, I still have this passion for volleyball, but I am not college ready, not even slightly. And I was even ashamed to tell my teammates in high school about it. I was like, yeah, they're going to laugh at me if I say I want to play in college. And I got on a college team through no doing of my own. And the first year I was awful. I mean, I learned a ton, but I was pretty bad. And then my second year, kind of came to life. And it was a junior college, a D1 junior college, and we did amazing. And I was able to kind of create that film and send it to coaches. And the Lord, through an incredible story, brought me here. And kind of came down to the wire of I couldn't come down to try out, and I couldn't send her film. And it was for the beach team. And I didn't play beach volleyball. I played indoor volleyball. And so we're at a stopping point. And my mom was like, Leah, you need to tell the coach your story. It's a Christian school, and your story is full of Christ. And so I emailed her, and I just kind of told her that the Lord had equipped me in volleyball, and he's calling me to more volleyball. And so I know he'll equip me. And so that's when she emailed me back with a scholarship offer. And so I think it's been that's so cool. Yeah. And so I think the Lord he gave me that gift of knowing from the very beginning it was just none of my own doing. And also humbling me so much, because I was never the best, never ever. And so then I came here to PBA, and I'd always had like bad back issues from breaking my back in 2016, and it took me out in October of my first season here, and took me out for months, and those were key seasons or key months to me playing the first season. And so the first official season that we had, I was like last on the team. And so there again, just humble pie after humble pie. But I still loved it. I still like wanted to do it. And then I took a lot of therapy and a lot of time getting better over the summer, doing great, playing, working out. And then I come back and I had the same issue, and my back was hurting again, and I was out. And so that is when I really felt the Lord potentially calling me away. But it was so weird because I felt that I was a volleyball player. And even though my identity wasn't fully in volleyball like a lot of other people, it still was. And I think it's almost impossible to have that big of a commitment in your life without it becoming your identity in some sort of way, even if it's healthy. And so that is when I kept, it was a month process of me, I completely surrendered it to the Lord, and I said, Lord, change my heart on this. And every time I'd be in a situation, like I went to church, and I remember sitting in the pew and being like, could I sit here and not be a volleyball player? And it was so, pigs could have flown, like, rather than me think I wouldn't be a volleyball player. And every time I would get this resounding, you are fine without volleyball. And it blew my mind how every single situation I was like, yeah, I could not be a volleyball player right now. And it was so weird. And obviously it's going to sound different to somebody that doesn't play volleyball, but it's what if that was motherhood, you know? Right. And it's those things that we identify with, and so it's just a resounding, the Lord was so sweet to me through volleyball, and so sweet to show me that none of it was my own doing. And the second that I would ever think it was my own doing, I would be last pick for a game, and I'm like, wow, I'm really just like not good at this. And I was better than the average, obviously, because I made it on a couple college teams, but like I'm not anything that's going to be in the books. But it's just incredible to see what the Lord did through me, like with it. So it's kind of a long-winded answer of finding your identity in things, or finding your identity in Christ.
I love that. And I think my favorite thing, even thinking of my own story, like I played football 11 years, and then I had a back injury, actually, and went through the process to get back to a place where I was healthy enough to keep playing. And by the time that I was, it was like, wait a minute. Yeah. There's more out there than football. But something that I think is really sweet for me that I see hints of in your story as well is like things like some of my best friends to this day I have because of football. Some of the coolest stories and moments in my life would not have happened without football, even in my relationship with the Lord.
100%.
But the Lord also works outside of football, outside of volleyball. And so to see in your story that you're so able and aware to see of how even in your identity as a volleyball player, right, God was moving and God was working, but now not as a volleyball player, God is still moving and God is still working. And so even when these massive changes happen that we experience, that we're like, oh man, now I don't know who I am anymore, right? Sometimes it's way more dramatic than others, but there are moments of that question of like, oh man, who am I today? And then tomorrow something crazy happens and you feel like you have to ask yourself that again. But what you can always look back to is that rock of like, okay, this is who I am. These other things play a role and influence that slightly in certain ways, but this is who I am, and no matter what the rest of it looks like, God is still moving. And I think that's so good. And so my last question for you guys, while I have you with me today, is very, very simply, when thinking about this conversation, when thinking about your identity, what it means to be created in the image of God, when thinking about the question, who am I, what it means to be in Christ, all these sorts of things. What do you guys feel from each of you is the most important thing for a college student to remember?
You go first on that one. I don't know. That question kills me.
I think a few things. I think in terms of identity, the most important thing to consistently ask is like, who is Christ and what is Christ doing in me in this season? Because that question of who am I and what is my identity, that will carry you through every season. And that's a well that's never going to run dry. Like you can get to a point where you know everything there is to know about the Enneagram or everything there is to know about volleyball or football, but you are never going to get to a point where you know everything there is to know about Christ. But I think somebody who's been in college and is now out of it, people will say, I hear this phrase of like, college is the best 4 years of your life. That's not true. It's just not. It is though the most unique 4 years of your life. You all can roll your eyes at me from wherever you are. As busy as you are now, you will never have more time in your life than you do right now. Your time is uniquely designed to find out more about the things you're passionate about, the people around you, and about yourself. So I would say the most important thing for a college student is to recognize that that's the season you're in. That as many things that are packed into your day, the thing that you're most responsible for right now is you. And so use that time to learn more about your passions and the things that give you peace. I think that's so good. But also know that like these are also just 4 years, right? Maybe 5. It was 5 for me. But it's just a tiny portion. And so you don't have to figure everything out in these 4 years. You don't need to walk out of college knowing what you're going to do or what your passions are. This is kind of like an all over the place answer, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing to ask about identity in answering that question is who made me and gave me this identity. And once you answer that, then you can answer those other things. And I also think like Lord reveals things to us. Like I think that a lot of times we think that about God and ourselves of like, it's this great mystery. And there are mysterious things about it, but like the Lord desires to teach us and to show us. And so I think when we begin there, that we'll find all the rest of the pieces that we're looking for.
That's good. That's really good.
Love it up to you.
Yeah, me too. I think this question is hard for me. Very, very hard. I am currently in a very big struggle, whatever you want to call it, of what is the most important thing. And I'm graduating in a month today, like literally a month today. And yeah, it's insane. And I'm trying to figure out that question myself. And some things that I can say from personal experience, because I really don't feel qualified to answer this, because I don't think I've figured it out. But I'm growing and I'm figuring it out. Is some of the most important things are growing and your friends and how you are with them and pursuing the Lord. And those are the things I know, because I don't know. I like, obviously with volleyball gone, that has left a massive hole. And it's a good hole, and there's a lot of growth that can be put into that, but I haven't figured out what's supposed to fill that hole right now.
Yeah.
And so I haven't figured out what my passions are. I haven't figured out what my purpose is. And college has been phenomenal. I would never take it back, and there's so many lessons, and I really have figured out who I am to a small part of me through college. But I don't know like what the most important part of college is, or I don't know the answer to that question. It's just constantly growing and seeking what the Lord has for you. That's one of the biggest things is like, we don't know. And I don't know, but I know somebody that does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he might not, it's one of those things. It's like, okay, how long is it going to be until you let me know what my next thing is?
Yeah.
So yeah, the resounding answer that I have for you is I really don't know. I think it's important to keep seeking the answer of what's important, and as I've been thinking and saying is like, I don't know the answer to what's most important or what I should do, but I do know the person that knows that, and that's Jesus, and he can provide those answers to us. And I think it's just really important to keep seeking him and seeking his face, and apart from that, he'll lead us to where we're supposed to go.
Yeah, that's really, really good. If I can encourage you guys, you especially, but you also, because this concern and these frustrations of wondering who we are really doesn't go away, and it's something we are always asking ourselves. And so, if I could encourage y'all and everybody listening in, everybody watching, with something that like about it. This is gonna sound funny. Little over a year ago, I was watching VeggieTales for the first time in a very long time.
Sure.
A very long time. 2 months.
And me and a very dear friend of mine were watching together, and I don't even remember which one we were watching, but at the end, I was left in tears. At the very end of the episode, I guess, I was reminded of something that Bob and Larry say literally at the end of every episode of the VeggieTales. And they close every one. And it's something I grew up hearing all the time as a kid because it was always on, but hadn't heard in so long. And I think is such a good reminder when thinking about who we are. But Bob and Larry get together on the kitchen counter right at the end of every episode and say, now remember, kids, God made you special, and he loves you very much. And I think
good.
that we need to hear that.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that. I need to hear that right now. And yeah, so if I could encourage y'all with that, God made you special, and he loves you very much.
That's so good.
Yeah, man. Thank you guys so much for being here. This
Yeah.
was so
Anytime.
much fun.
This was so fun.
So much fun. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved every second of it. Yeah, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
And thank y'all for listening and for watching and for being with us today. And we will see you guys next time.